Good morning and welcome. I'm Dean Miller, the CEO of PACT, and I want to welcome you this morning to PACT's MedTech series. This is a part one talking about the challenges of a MedTech startup. And first and foremost, want to thank our supporters. We have some terrific organizations supporting our MedTech series and medical device entrepreneurs and companies in this region. And they are led by Baker Tilly, Drexel University, Duane Morris, Fox, Rothschild, and EisnerAmper. Thank you to all of you. This morning's session is going to be really interesting. We have a series of lightning talks followed by a moderated panel discussion on the topic. And of course, we're in a webcast. Please stay muted, but ask questions. It'll be small enough you'll be able to raise your hand at some point if you want to ask a question live. But what we would prefer you to do is to drop that question into chat. We'll monitor that throughout and make sure that we answer those questions. Of course, as you might be used to at this point in time with us, we will jump over to a networking opportunity in our Remo virtual networking room. You'll get that link later in the program, so don't worry about that. We will drop that in and let you know toward the end of the discussions when we're ready to move over to Remo. But we encourage you to stay and spend a little bit of time around the table talking to your fellow peers. So with that, let me kick it off. This is one of the benefits of the virtual environment that we've seen over the past year plus is that we're able to tap into experts around the country. In fact, we've done so around the world. And when it comes to medical devices, obviously you want to have the input of many experts. And so we're joined this morning by some terrific folks that are based actually around the country. And we want to welcome them. And what I'm going to do first is introduce our opening lightning talk. And that is going to be done by Doug Kelly. Doug is coming to us live from the DC, Virginia, Maryland belt. And just really briefly, what you might not know about Doug is that he comes previous to the FDA from the West Coast, where he was an entrepreneur and an investor in the MedTech space. And he now holds the role of Deputy Director of Science at the FDA. Welcome, Doug.
Thank you. Yeah, as you mentioned, I was a venture capitalist for 30 years, started a bunch of companies, financed a lot of companies, and had some firsthand experience in not only MedTech space, but biotech and manufacturing, a couple other things, and software. And I got to kind of see the difference between how companies are developed in the MedTech space and how they become successful compared to other disciplines, other sectors. And it's very enlightening. And so a little while ago, Jeff Shuren, a year ago, asked me if I would come help him. I was originally supposed to work on the COVID response and help him fix the MedTech ecosystem. But he said, fixing the MedTech ecosystem is a big enough project. Let's just work on that for now. So that's part of what I've been working on. And so I'm going to talk about, I've repurposed some slides. Mark has seen these slides before. They're part of the original MDUFA discussions, or Medical Device User Fee Act discussions that we're currently working with Mark and others on. So I was going to talk about what the MedTech space looks like for entrepreneurs and some potential fixes. So with that, I'm going to
take over the screen.
Share my screen. Yeah, here we go. And I'm dropping you right into the middle of this presentation. So I'm sorry if it's a little out of context, but I'm going to, what you see here, and you can see my screen right now? Anybody see it? You see the Chevron? Okay, awesome. Okay. So this is the path that, and just ignore the MDUFA stuff because this is really about the MedTech ecosystem, but this is really the path that entrepreneurs have to face. You come up with an idea and then you go through all these things, clinical planning, FDA marketing, and then you have to deal with payers and coding and coverage decisions from professional societies, and then ultimately widespread adoption and reimbursement. And our public health mission at FDA is safe and effective medical devices, but it's only really works if you actually have companies that survive long enough to actually give patients medical devices. So there's some issues with that, and that is, hold on a second here. This is the typical process that entrepreneurs actually face. So after they have their idea, there's this clinical testing phase done with the FDA. It's highly uncertain. Communication is very poor. A lot of times entrepreneurs get poor advice from consultants that's very tactical and not very strategic. You get your FDA marketing decision and people think, oh, that's great, I'm done. But then they run into this buzzsaw where you may have picked a really skinny indication to get through the FDA really fast and really cheap, but that means nothing to payers who are looking for more evidence. the professional societies for coding and coverage decisions are also looking for more evidence. And ultimately, patients want more evidence to see what's going on. Any of these three things, if you based your financing on just getting your FDA decision, you cannot finance these other things that just take too long. And all these stakeholders should have been addressed really early in the process and incorporated into your clinical study and evidence generation. So what happens here is that these companies have late failures. It's typically a fire sale to some big company, which is really happy to have you do all that 10 years of work and wipe you out, so you can then go back and to your academic job or your engineering job. But this is part of the reason that the MedTech ecosystem is in such dire straits right now, that investors get burned in this phase because they thought, the entrepreneurs said that it was only going to take X amount of time to get through the FDA. It oftentimes takes longer. And then there are very few people who want to invest in companies that aren't really profitable yet or aren't at market introduction yet. So what you have here is a bunch of stakeholders. You have, like I said, the providers, the payers, and the patients, and they're all highly siloed. They have their own legitimate reasons for needing the evidence they need. Payers want to make sure that is this really going to be applicable to my patient population, and are you going to have to do 3 procedures instead of 1 procedure? Is 1 procedure going to be definitive? Patients really want to know, are the endpoints for the clinical study you designed, is that really what you want? Is that really relevant to me? And oftentimes, innovators will come up with product features that really don't mean anything to the patients, but are really just there to make the product unique, but not necessarily more valuable to patients. And providers want to know you're not going to gore their sacred cow, that they can still run a practice based with that. And they also want to know that some of the things that these other people want. They have their own unique evidence requirements, but the problem is most people don't address them until it's too late. So what we're asking is that, based on the FDA's unique position in the ecosystem, we're really the first trusted and accountable institution that is asking people for evidence. What if we could use our position to get people in front of those stakeholders really early and help them through the process in a way that makes the companies more sustainable? So we came up with this idea through the total product lifecycle called the TAP advisors. And these TAP advisors are essentially consultants who pull together all of these stakeholders early on in the process, and they're like a Sherpa. They walk you through the FDA approval. They get you really fast answers. They make sure you talk with enough insurers. You're not going to talk to every insurer, but you'll talk to enough so that you could have an idea of what evidence they need. You'll talk to patients so you can figure out what their risk-reward ratio is going to be, and you'll talk to people in the provider world who can really talk to you about how your product and your idea really stacks up. And again, the idea is to bring these people in. Instead of having it all done late back here, you're getting it done really early, and therefore you can evaluate up front. You may decide that after talking to payers, and the payers want 10 years of prospective data, you just may say that's too expensive and I can't finance that, in which case you can bail out, but you'll bail out after only putting a couple $100,000 into your project instead of $50 or $100 million. So this is the secret of IT investing, is that IT investors typically don't have to put very much money in before they figure out what their minimum viable product is. And once they figure that out, then they put the pedal to the metal and go commercial. We need to be doing this in the medtech world much more than we've been doing before. And the problem is that a lot of the consulting infrastructure out there is really tactical, made to get you through one specific stage of the process, but not to really carry you all the way through in a sustainable way. And so the idea here is that instead of having this FDA study that you do, not having talked to anybody, find yourself in this position right here where you're talking to, after your FDA approval, talking to other stakeholders, and then they tell you have to do another study. Instead, you do a study that's combined in the beginning, where once you hit your FDA endpoints, then you roll it over into a payer study, and you don't save months, you don't save days, you can save years potentially here. So the other thing that we want to do is we want to change how FDA is staffed. We need many more reviewers and much more capacity to have a normal dialogue. So this is the typical dialogue at the FDA now. You have a pre-sub meeting, you have a bunch of questions, you get an hour-long meeting. There's oftentimes a long pause, and then there's a second meeting, maybe 6 months later, in which case, during this time, there may have been changes at FDA. And there's a name for this kind of conversation. This is called a long distance relationship, and they're never successful. So what we're looking to change is to make it much more informal, where there's constant back and forth between the FDA and the sponsor. There's a lot of low stakes dialogue that results in, just like normal conversation in business or anything else, there's a meeting of the minds over time. And so there's not these long spaces. I have a friend who has a company. He went through the pre-sub process, and then in the time between the first pre-sub and the second pre-sub, our guidance had changed. He hadn't really checked in, and as a result, he had to do another financing, which diluted him. And it should never have happened. There should have been a much more a better dialogue. So the idea that we want to do is, this is completely out of proportion to how it's actually going to be. But the TAP advisors is this very thin group on the top of essentially Sherpas to get you through the position. And it's really mostly increasing staff to have some capacity. So when you're asking a question, you can get your question answered in real time. If not today, then tomorrow, or at least this week, and not 59 days from now, not 89 days from now. And so it's like a constant dialogue. And then we'll have, and again, this is not to scale, it's done for aesthetics, but you increase the stakeholder engagement group so that you have a chance to talk to all these people. The TAP advisor kind of coordinates all this. And the result is a much better, you end up with a much more cohesive evidence package, a much more robust company, a company that's sustainable downstream and can potentially make your project easier to finance. And which is the big problem now, is that these things are really unfinanceable because the risks are really unknown. You can't, as a medtech entrepreneur with a straight face, tell your investors that this is going to be a 4-year project. You know, it's 4 years plus or minus 10, because you just don't know how it's going to work out, because typically you haven't engaged all the stakeholders. We want to change that so you can go in with a straight face and tell your investors that this is exactly how long it'll take. It works for everybody. This works for entrepreneurs with early stage companies, and it works for the big incumbents too. Actually, the biggest beneficiary at FDA of the communications programs that we've had, whether it's pre-sub meetings or breakthrough, have been big companies. And it's especially important for them because, unlike small companies, they have a huge amount of infrastructure. They have giant marketing infrastructure, finance infrastructure, and what have you. And if you've got a group of guys that are selling a particular product line, you've got a competitive threat that comes along, and suddenly the market is shifting, you're carrying a lot of extra weight that is just waiting for responses from FDA. And so provisioning the FDA so you can get those rapid responses for things like competitive threats, or for things like safety. If you've had if you've heard that there's a safety recall and we're getting a signal, there's a lot of opacity in that system that we can cure by just making sure that we have review groups and staff at FDA who are provisioned to give much faster answers. How am I doing on time?
We are at time.
Okay.
So if you've got one more thing to show, you can feel free to do it. But you good?
In fact, let me get to my good questions. There we go.
Well, we're going to do questions at the end. So, but you did have. Well, we'll do questions at the end once we get through it in a panel. And
great.
Again,
let me stop my screen sharing here. And with that, let me turn it over to my fantastic colleague, Mark Leahey, neighbor, longtime friend, suit and tie wearer. Take it away, Mark.
Thanks, some people might not know this, but Mark is definitely the biggest advocate for the medical device industry. He's been the CEO of MDMA for 20 years. And yes, he is in a suit and tie because he is walking over to the Capitol after this session to give testimony on behalf of the industry. So welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Dean and Doug. Great to see you, and appreciate the invitation from our friends at PACT. Wish we could be in person, but again, as Dean mentioned, there's also the efficiencies here. As Dean mentioned, I'm the CEO of MDMA, and again, we represent about 300, primarily small to mid-sized venture-backed companies. We try to be their eyes and ears in DC. What's going on at FDA, CMS, with IP up on Capitol Hill. And again, our companies don't have the army of lawyers or lobbyists, so collectively we pool our resources and provide them the advocacy and education. And I often refer to myself as the plumber. People only call when things get stuck. And so, and I appreciate Mike Daly and many of the PAC members who we've been partnering with over many years to advance ultimately innovations, technologies that improve patient care. That's our overarching mission, is to, what can we do from a policy, education, implementation phase to accelerate patient access to safe and effective technologies. And we've certainly seen quite a few changes over the last 15 months in the healthcare system. But I think there's been a greater appreciation for medical technology, both on the devices and diagnostic space. And so I think there is an opportunity here that we can leverage on a go-forward basis. You know, from my perch, having been here the last 2 decades, 10, 15 years ago, the biggest call I received was around the uncertainty at FDA. And as folks recall, in that 2008, 9, 10 period, I mean, basically the FDA just pulled the brakes and no PMAs were getting approved, 510Ks were halted. There was a question as to whether 510K would even survive. And so there was just great uncertainty and it really paralyzed investment. I think 2008, there were 118 Series A financings that dropped to 18 in 2009. So it really went off the cliff with the economic crisis, but also, again, I think the shift in mindset at FDA that became much more risk adverse. And ultimately, and again, I think the paradigm there was, well, FDA is there to protect patient care. And so there were many who were saying we need to add more requirements, more regulations, more trials. And then realizing that the flip side of the coin here was that US technologies would come into the market 40th, 70th in the world. So, that opportunity cost of patients not having access to technologies that were developed, 30 miles from where they lived, there was more patient harm being done there than, and again, there was objective data being collected that showed that there was no, increased safety risk for medical technologies in the US. In fact, the US was the gold standard and remains the gold standard. So, collectively, we brought data to the table and appreciate our collaboration with our friends at FDA, and in the environment in 2012, 13 started getting much better. And candidly, the number of questions or concerns that we get from FDA on the FDA front had dropped dramatically. I'd say they picked up in the last 6 months, but up until about October, particularly due to the public health emergency with EUAs coming on board, I think interestingly, the review staff working from home allowed, as Doug mentioned, more real-time interactions, more collaboration, more informal feedback. This is something that industry pushed forward. MDUFA 2 was the interactive guidance. So, this shouldn't be a new concept. FDA committed to do this more than 15 years ago. It's nice to see them starting to actually implement. So, we need more of that. I agree with Doug. And again, there's an infrastructure in place that allows for that. Certainly, we can look to ways to enhance it. So on the FDA front, I'd say it has become more, much improved over the last 10 to 15 years. But those improvements on the FDA front have kind of exposed issues, as Doug said, on the reimbursement front. We work closely with the National Venture Capital Association, and they do surveys periodically. And again, 10, 15 years ago, by a factor of 2 to 1, regulatory uncertainty was the biggest, the single biggest factor that would prevent them from making a Series A investment. The most recent study I saw was by a factor of 3 to 1. It was reimbursement uncertainty. And, unlike the FDA, where you have a single target to focus in on, as Doug alluded to, on the reimbursement side, it's much more complex. You have, to deal with the AMA, dealing with the CPT issues and RUC. You have CMS, the mothership in Baltimore, for national decisions. You have the local MACs for local decisions, and you have all the private insurance companies. So again, with our reforms and effort with FDA, at least we could focus with one partner. Here, it's much more complex, and we do have been working with the AMA for the last decade to try to drive more consistency, transparency in the evidence requirements to get a Category 1 code. And again, Lori McGraw has come in there the last couple of years, and I think really has leaned in, and they've updated their literature requirements to, one of the recommendations we had was there now that with the globalization of clinical trials, FDA is as long as they're robust and done appropriately, FDA is now approving PMAs with only OUS data. So we're suggesting, why should a company have to then replicate that data in the US to be peer reviewed and published, and and have a US trial just to satisfy kind of an antiquated AMA requirement. So AMA has updated that guideline to allow for if a product's been approved solely on OUS data, that suffice for the reasons of a Cat 1 code. But then, as we noted, you still have the private payers and CMS to deal with, and the lack of transparency as to what private payers, how they make determinations for coverage is significant. We've actually, James Chambers out of Tufts University conducted a study for us a few years back that was peer reviewed and published, and kind of mapped the top 20 private payers across the country, representing about 85% of covered lives. And very few, if any, had publicly available transparent information about how they make their coverage determinations. None of the private payers incorporated patient preference into those coverage decisions. So again, a lot of opportunity there where we work with our members to kind of map the best practices from Australia, from France, Germany, about transparency and process improvements to generate high quality evidence for the purposes of coverage. And we continue those dialogues with the private payers. And then on the CMS front, we've had ongoing discussions for about 7 years now with Tamara Sarek Jensen, who runs the coverage group at CMS, and others, about the importance of narrowing that gap from the regulatory to reimbursement. And I think, there's been a recognition, particularly for small to mid-sized companies. If you're a large company, you have hundreds or thousands of products on the market generating revenues, you can subsidize delays and hiccups and lags. But if you're a smaller company with a single product, that could be make or break. And so we started down this road of provisional coverage or accelerated coverage for innovative technologies. In the Obama administration, we had a proposed rule at OMB that then a new administration came in, all regulations were bad, that was pulled back. And then at the end of the previous administration, the MCIT rule was finalized and published that would provide for accelerated coverage for FDA designated breakthrough technologies. I know Dr. Shuren and others put a lot of work into this. We were very supportive, but the Biden administration has put a pause on that. And our expectation is that will likely require some polishing if it is to move forward. There are some, antagonists, not surprisingly, the private insurance companies, most notably, who are calling to rescind the rule that they don't want Medicare beneficiaries to have faster access to these breakthrough technologies. But fortunately, again, there was a public comment period, over 215 responses, well over 200 were supportive from patients, from physicians, from innovators, from investors. So, we remain very engaged with the administration on finding a workable path forward here that would provide accelerated coverage while you collect additional data to support, broader coverage determinations. And I think, again, if we can continue to work to make, we're in the midst of the user fee negotiations. I'm not going to get in a back and forth right now, but we are committed to making investments to enhance the process with the FDA front. But we also feel it's critically important to make sure that both CMS, private payers, that there's greater transparency, accountability, and predictability here for those coverage decisions. And again, it's not just coverage. We noted the working on the coding side with the AMA, and then you have the payment issues as well. And again, there's an ongoing work stream we have. Increasingly, we're seeing times where CMS could do carrier, not set national pricing, and do carrier pricing, which again, there's some uncertainty there. But again, maybe I'll close in the last 2 minutes here. I think the other opportunity that we've learned from COVID, though, is that whether it's the conducting of clinical trials remotely, the ways in which reimbursement of telehealth can occur, remote monitoring. I think there's a recognition that healthcare doesn't need to be delivered through the brick and mortar, the four walls of a hospital or an ASC or a physician's office. And again, I think medical technology has already been migrating in that direction. But the holy grail here is being able to drive healthcare to the lowest cost center. And again, with labor being the single biggest driver in the healthcare system, that's moving from the most acute setting to the least acute. And ideally, I think, the home is the ideal setting where, with the baby boomer population increasing age, there's increased demand, obviously, maybe limited capacity from the traditional healthcare structure. And so I think there's a lot of effort and energy going into how do you deliver high quality healthcare to the home. And I think that's very exciting. And I think the technology is advancing rapidly, and we just have to make sure that the reimbursement structures follow suit. So that's kind of around the world from my perspective in 10 minutes. And now it's my pleasure to turn it over to Marie.
Marie, welcome. As you're coming off mute, Marie Marlow joins us typically by New York, but via Florida today. Again, the beauty of virtual. And Maria spent a career leading clinical and regulatory affairs for a number of companies, including Bard, and then pivoted into becoming a consultant to many companies. And so as Maria comes off mute and joins us, we look forward to hearing from her. She's very good at clinical and regulatory affairs, but self-professed, not as good with the mute button. But if you look to the bottom of your tray there, Maria, on the bottom left-hand corner, you should see the opportunity to click on mute and come off of it.
It looks like her mouse
is busted.
Her mouse is an issue.
Well, you know what? We might actually be able to help her.
I think Heidi, you can override it.
Heidi, can you override and take Maria off?
Yeah, I'm working on it right now. 1 second.
And while you're doing that, by the way, Mark, that was incredible. So appreciate your insight there. There's a bunch of questions in Q&A. We will get to those. And since I forgot to say it before, Doug, remind me to send a present to whomever recruited you to the FDA. I think having your experience and brain as an investor in the space is a tremendous asset in the FDA. So that's fantastic.
It's been a great journey. Great people here. There's like this opaque screen between before things come to the FDA and after they leave the FDA. And so people it's kind of like when you work in a trauma center and your patient comes in, you do all this work and then they leave and you really have no idea what happened to them. They're typically lost to follow-up, and that's a big problem at FDA as well.
All right, Maria is sharing screen. We've lost her on video, but Maria, I think we do have you on audio. Can you?
Yep, you do. And I'm sorry, there seems to be some glitchy thing going on here that my mouse doesn't work. If I've got the camera on, I have no idea what that's about. So I'll put the camera back on after my presentation.
Terrific, take it away.
Yeah, anyway, apologies for that glitch. And I am very happy to be here talking to you today. Doug, you gave me a great opening because what I want to be talking about here is regulatory strategy. And you talked about the fact that a lot of consultants are tactical, not strategic. And I hope to be able to tell you about how we look at things strategically. I really like what I do for a living. Our industry is a business that I've been in for over 30 years, and I think we do great things for patients and the people who take care of those patients. I can get pretty passionate about what I do for a living because I think we're a great contributor to our society and to our economy. In the years that M Squared has been in business, I don't think that there are any two clients or any two projects that have been exactly alike. So I'm going to be talking about some of the things that we take into consideration when we're working with a client to bring a new product to market. So you can see exactly what I'm talking about here. When we start working with a client, before we start talking about regulatory strategies, we want to make sure we get to know them well. It's important for us to know how far along they are in the product development or technology development process. So for example, let's say an early stage company comes to us and says, we found a cost-effective way to extract the glue from barnacles, and we think it could have broad applications in aerospace, microchip manufacturing, medical adhesives, so on and so forth. Well, we would say, fantastic. Have you done any preliminary work to see, for example, if it works better in soft tissue versus bone, or maybe even the eye for something like retinal detachment, anything like that? And they may say, yeah, we thought about all those things, but we haven't done any work or testing yet. But we want to know which one would be the fastest and easiest one through FDA. Quite frankly, at that point, we would say, don't think about FDA right now. Keep doing the early R&D work. Keep trying to figure out how this might work best. Try to develop this concept, develop your technology, and develop it into products that you think will benefit your business and take you in the direction you want your business to go. And then we can talk regulatory strategy. Don't limit yourself in this very early stage by trying to fit into an easy regulatory pathway. Go ahead and dream big, see where this can take you. Call us if you want to bounce around ideas, but don't fixate on the regulatory process right now. Focus on developing your technology or your idea into a product. However, if the company's already done some early R&D work, and this may be design development, prototype development work, they may be ready to start documenting this under FDA requirements for quality systems, especially the design control requirements. And this is really helpful to start with that first, what I would say is a module of the quality system, the design control module, because it gives you a firm foundation for the quality and regulatory requirements ahead. But it's also at this point that you start talking about possible regulatory pathways for various indications for use, which indications might imply an easier or more difficult regulatory pathway, and those types of considerations. We also might start talking at that point about regulatory requirements such as biocompatibility, biomechanical testing. This often has a huge impact on the cost and time of bringing a product to market. This may help the company to start refining the specific indications for use that they might want to pursue, since this is where you start thinking about the important considerations for the regulatory pathway, types of clinical studies, user or human factor studies that might be needed. At this stage, we still might say, let's keep open-minded about regulatory classification. Once you start doing some of this testing, you might change or tweak your indications for use. That may change the classification. So let's get some basic testing done and see where that takes us. Now, if the company already has data from feasibility studies or first-in-man studies, or maybe even from well-designed, well-conducted animal studies, this is where we kick it into high gear with solidifying a regulatory strategy. And at this stage, we likely know many of the factors that we need to move ahead with a solid regulatory strategy. Mark mentioned the use of OUS, and I'd add to that real-world experience data. During Q&A, if you want a little bit more information about the PMAs that we've done that have been supported by OUS and real-world evidence, I'm happy to talk more about that then. So anyhow, let's keep going with this example that we were using with the barnacle glue. Let's say it showed promise both as a soft tissue adhesive and as a bone adhesive. So we'd start talking about whether a good first indication for use might be something like augmenting closure of the sternum after open heart or open chest procedures. So a surgeon could use a absorbable suture to close the chest, or maybe we'd say it's augmenting fracture repair. So metal plates and screws might be able to be removed earlier or easier. These could potentially be easier regulatory pathways, class 2 through the 510(k) or de novo process. But we also might talk about what we call internally at my place a go big or go home indication for use. So instead of saying we're augmenting a procedure that's an accepted standard of care procedure, we do something that moves forward into a primary treatment that might replace current standard of care. So if we're talking about something like repair of retinal detachment or something like that, where we're completely replacing an existing procedure or technology, this is something that might move the technology into class 3. All right, you've also got situations where your startup may be founded upon the acquisition or development of an existing technology. So clearly in that situation, the regulatory strategy is going to be different. You've already got precedents and predicates that could dictate how and when you move forward with preclinical, clinical testing, as well as your first pre-subs and subsequent regulatory experience. So in this case, your regulatory strategy is going to be might be more focused on the review times that occurred with predicate and precedent devices. You might be more focused on looking at things like 510(k) summaries or summaries of safety and effectiveness to understand how the technology had previously been reviewed and where there might be opportunities to shorten the regulatory pathway. All right, let's talk about how your business strategy could affect your regulatory strategy. So we're going to continue with the same example of the barnacle glue. And let's say, as we've been discussing, there are multiple applications, indications for use. You may want to think very carefully about whether your company is going to license technology versus commercialize it yourself. My personal opinion is that the regulatory strategy is wildly different here. For example, if you're going to license your technology, you may think in terms of really focusing on very robust preclinical testing and perhaps some clinical testing and getting that into a master file with FDA, rather than pursuing the actual clearances or approvals yourself. You would think very differently about the quality system for your company if you're not going to be the one to ever commercialize the product. The regulatory strategy is sometimes also dictated or based upon your investors and the timing they expect. Mark talked about that a little bit, and Doug did as well. We find that investors usually like pre-sub meetings a lot. They like the assurance that it gives. They believe that they can get feedback from FDA on the regulatory strategy that's been developed. What you have to do there, though, is be aware of the fact that in my personal experience, even though I'm excited to take advantage of the TAP advisors, in my personal experience, sometimes those pre-sub meetings delay meeting certain milestones. So you have to think in terms of, okay, what's the timing here if I build in pre-sub meetings with FDA along the regulatory pathway. We like to advise our clients about how important it is to choose the right partners for R&D and manufacturing. Many small companies outsource these activities, and a company can save tens of thousands or maybe even hundreds of thousands of dollars if these vendors are carefully selected, and the contract with these vendors provides for them taking on some of the responsibilities for FDA compliance with quality systems and requirements. If your vendor has been audited and can show that they meet FDA QMS requirements for design controls and manufacturing, you may be able to have a simpler and more streamlined quality management system for your company. You can base some of your policies on your vendor, your partner QMS, and then you'd have a very robust section of your QMS that focuses on vendor qualification and oversight. Many of our clients have a plan for both US and international commercialization. It's not particularly onerous, in my opinion, to develop a regulatory strategy and a quality management system that meets both FDA requirements as well as the requirements for CE marking, even with the new EU MDR requirements. When these things are planned early on, preclinical and when required clinical testing can be designed and often can be designed and conducted in tandem, and that can avoid costly duplication of efforts later down the road.
Hey, Maria, just want to give you a 1-minute warning.
Thanks very much. If we're really going to help our clients, it's important for us to know if they're planning a somewhat early exit strategy versus growing and developing their startup into a successful commercial stage company. For a relatively early exit, we develop a quality management system that's flexible enough to be incorporated into a larger established QMS, but also sufficiently robust to pass a due diligence review. If strategics are already identified, we'd look at a strategy that emphasizes product clearances or approvals that complement the strategic's existing product lines. If our client hopes to become a successful commercial stage company, we might develop a regulatory strategy focused on differentiating our client's technology from competitor products. So in other words, the regulatory strategy only works if it complements the business strategy. And I hope I brought that in at 1 minute.
You did. Thank you so much, Maria.
Thank you too.
All right, it's time to transition to our panel, and I want to welcome David Yonce, someone who's not a stranger to our community, certainly here in the Philadelphia area and the medical device world in general. You know, David has been an executive at a number of different firms, including Boston Scientific. Most recently, he's led global innovation at DSM Biomedical. He's now jumped into the startup, or more close to startup, CEO role, leading Cogwear, and still remains an active supporter, certainly of the medical device community of PACT, and a member of our advisory board. Mark referenced Mike Daly, another advocate for the industry and a great supporter of PACT, who also sits on our advisory board. Welcome, David, and I'm going to turn it over to you to lead the conversation with our esteemed panel. And hopefully you've been watching some of the Q&A that's been coming across, because there's some good questions out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that introduction, Dean. As I was reflecting on the presentations, I think this is a fantastic topic for us to discuss for startups in particular, because usually when startups get going, and actually for new products and big companies as well, usually it's the technology or the market fit, the clinical need that is top of mind, and we tend to focus on that. but the regulatory impacts and the reimbursement impacts, as Doug brought up, those are the things that ultimately are going to define the value that we have. And so I've seen a lot of questions come in, and we're going to get to those in just a second. I thought maybe, Doug, I'd start with you. Certainly your TAP program, I saw a lot of chatter pop up as soon as you brought that up. I think it's a great idea, because what you have come in with the lens from the VC community, and you've seen the fact that things, as you described, are delayed over time. I'm curious, in terms of bringing together the reimbursement, the payers, the regulatory pieces, where are you in the TAP program, and how would one get involved with that from a startup standpoint?
Well, so the idea, again, for the various forums, if you'll excuse the expression, is, for payers, we don't need to have every single payer participate. We need enough covered lives represented by those payers to give companies escape velocity. So if we had 50 or 100 million covered lives of payers represented, that would be enough that if you got a commitment from them that this is the evidence that we need to give you coverage, that would give you that, if you had your market introduction, that sharp hockey stick, commercial takeoff. The issue right now is that so many companies, they do their commercial launch, they have very limited coverage, and instead their launch looks like this. And there may be legitimate reasons why that's the case, even if it's a great product, that you just may not have enough payers. But the problem is that if you're looking to finance that company or looking to get a strategic acquisition, the strategic acquirer will absolutely look at that in the worst possible light. And they'll say, the dogs aren't eating the dog food, and that's a bad thing. So the idea is that if you could get enough people together in the beginning, so you could get at least, you could field the sales force and efficiently sell as much as that sales force could do, you would have that. You won't have 400 million covered lives. You may have 50 million covered lives, but that's enough to give you something like that. I saw another question in the link that said, where are you is this going to be a stable group? And the answer is no, because certain payers are very interested in different things. Some people are really focused on cardiovascular and metabolic. Some people are focused on other things. And depending on what your device is, if it's barnacle glue, the people interested in that are going to be different than people who are interested in say, a new kind of implantable cardiac device. And then you asked the second question. I'm sorry to talk so much.
So the question is, oftentimes interacting with regulatory agencies or the payers, especially someone coming from a technical background, that can be a daunting thing. How would you recommend that somebody get involved and start the conversation with the FDA and the TAP program?
Okay, assuming the TAP program is implemented.
Essentially, I guess that's a question too. How far away are you from implementation of that?
Well, we have to get agreement with industry, and after I drug Mark and send him to a warehouse with some of my friends, I'm sure he'll come along. But the idea is that it would be a menu, and it's completely voluntary, and you can pick whatever you want off the menu. If you've already got the head of one of the professional societies as the head of your SAB, and you don't want to deal with those guys from that we brought together, then fine, you're good to go. And if you have already talked to a bunch of payers and done an econometric, or a bunch of patients have done an econometric study and understand what the risk-benefit trade-off is for your device, then you don't really need to do the stuff from us. But the other thing it really offers, though, is this idea that you can get these instantaneous responses from the FDA, which are hard to come by now because, again, review staff is so thin. And so you just basically, you have to qualify. So the initial products that we're going to offer for the TAP program are going to be breakthrough, as defined by MCIT and at FDA now, that breakthrough designation, and another group of products called safer technologies, or a STEP program. Those are products that are maybe of equivalent efficacy of other devices, but are just much safer and have much better product attributes. And then hopefully with negotiations with industry, we'll think of some other things. I was thinking like pediatric surgery, or some other devices that really have they're kind of orphans. They don't really have anybody there, but those patients suffer greatly. And we need to have some mechanism to address those things that maybe are outside of what would be the normal market forces.
Right, indeed. Thanks for that, Doug.
Yeah.
Hey, Mark, if I could pivot over to you, you talked a lot about the changes that have happened in reimbursement, and certainly moving forward, there's more changes in the reimbursement environment that people talk about, just a shift from pay for outcomes versus fee for service. That's been talked about, something that's been fairly difficult to implement. But as you look at the legislative landscape and what's happening on Capitol Hill, do you foresee any future changes in reimbursement coming, and how might startups think about navigating that?
Yeah, I think it is. Well, actually, just late last night, I'm proud to share with folks that Congressman Del Bunny, along with Congressman Upton, Congressman Walorski, introduced their MSIT bill. So that again would codify the final rule that has been delayed. And there's also an introduction of the discussion draft of the cures legislation in the first prong. And again, the cures was overwhelming bipartisan in 2016. A lot of that focused on regulatory efficiencies and established and codified the breakthrough program that FDA already in place, but codified that. And again, the first prong of the press release sent out by Congresswoman DeGette and Congressman Upton talked about the importance of focus on reimbursement and kind of narrowing that regulatory gap. So, I think that that's certainly a great opportunity. And so, there are some legislative activities. I think the real issue here, and this is probably less about legislation, maybe more about just public awareness, is how do you get again, the concept of TAP, I think everyone is intrigued. I think it's when you drill down and how do you execute on it. And I think, for right now, for example, CDRH has had for the past many years this payer advisory committee where companies can, tap, no pun intended, private insurance companies to participate and review. I'm on the executive committee of Excite. That's a national group that has representatives from FDA, CMS, private payers. If a company early on wants to engage all these stakeholders, this Excite model exists. So there are models that exist right now. The problem has been that if you are a technology that treats a patient between 55 and 65 and has a low to mid cost intervention that can delay a high cost intervention, the private payers are coming out of the woodwork to help you because they want to push that expensive procedure onto the balance sheet of Medicare. If you are a company with a high cost intervention between 35 and 55, the private payers are burrowing in. That's just not, and everyone talks about population health and investing now, but the reality is they all have their actuarial tables. And, right. If you're a standalone payer, they're going to, with the churn, they're much more, focused on, and this kind of ties back to your question of paying for value versus volume. It's a great concept. Everyone believes in it. The problem is that whether they're initiatives from private payers, even the ones from CMS, their lookout is 30, 60, 90 days after hospitalization. And so for any medical procedure that has an implant in which true outcomes need to be measured over multiple years, so you can use a less expensive implant. And if you're only measuring 90 days out, you can say, look, equivalent outcomes, we save money, we're saving money to the system. That's harming the patient though, because if you really want to tell the patient that they're equivalent or no worse off, you have to have a mechanism to judge, and we've argued for or advocated for, having a mechanism for these procedures that have, implantables, that they should have a 5, 7, 10-year horizon. And if all of a sudden there's an adverse impact, then you need to have a clawback, because again, right now, everyone's talking about paying for value over volume, but there's no mechanism to track long-term performance, and there's no incentive for durability for these products. So that's, and our friends at CMS on both sides of the aisle and both administrations acknowledge that. They just say we have to start somewhere. So I think, so the concept is there. And the last thing I'll say is, the value-based contracts that, have got a lot of noise and a lot of attention, those are really, and I see more focus on, harmonization and decreasing variability of what the delta is of what it costs, a procedure in this part of town costs, 2x of this part of town, and across the country is a lot of variation. And the folks at Dartmouth have actually done work on this for decades. I see that being a focus of value, that the payers are more interested about more consistency across the board than, try to standardize one product over another.
Yeah, the fly in the ointment in that as well is that there are companies that are coming along that are reading the telemetry and making it easy for doctors to read the telemetry of implantable devices over the course of a patient's, over the course of the lifetime of that device. That essentially becomes a mini registry. And those practices, if they're big enough, end up taking that data and use it to bid on new contracts because they know what the costs are for that patient. They have much more perfect information than their competitors do. And this information is going to be there for people to make the evaluation. And we're going to have to deal with it. I'm not going to have to deal with it, but the payers are going to have to deal with it because there will be that data out there.
So great discussion, these points. Maria, I got a question for you related to this. And Doug first teed it up with the fact that there's clinical studies that might be done to get coverage and get your device covered under PMA, but then there's also clinical studies that are needed for the payers just to show economic outcomes as well. Do you see this coming up more in your practice, and how much you advise startups to think about the economic outcomes portions of this?
Yeah, that's a really important discussion. We absolutely do talk about that early on, because the clinical evidence that's needed for a lot of different reasons. Again, if you're talking about an international strategy, a reimbursement strategy, a FDA regulatory strategy, more and more and more, the clinical evidence becomes an important component of that discussion. So it's often, let's say we've got a PMA device. That's the easiest way to talk about this. You're going to have to do a clinical study, or that you're going to have clinical evidence to get that PMA approved. Like I said, we've done studies with existing OUS data and that type of thing. A really good strategy is when you're starting the study, if you're starting a prospective study to support a PMA, you may want to think about, when you have collected enough data to meet the FDA requirement, start thinking about extending that study as soon as possible, maybe tweaking it a little to start collecting some of the data you're going to need for reimbursement purposes or for marketing purposes. So that's absolutely a discussion we have early on. Sometimes even for the original IDE study, it's extremely easy to think about adding on some additional follow-up parameters, collecting some additional data, say during a surgical procedure or something, that gets that process in motion. So yeah, absolutely, it's an important part of the study design.
I think that's fantastic advice, because the other thing is that, it's a huge competitive advantage if you've got that data and you've got competing products, and I've done this myself with companies, and we have other guys come along and say, oh, we're just as good as you. I said, really, where's your 7-year perspective data? Because we have 7 years, and I see you did your clinical trial 2 years ago. And let me know when you get to 7 years, because at that point we'll have 14 years of data that we could talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah, to that point, as Mark was talking about before, that paying for outcomes is great in theory, everyone agrees with it, but it's difficult to implement. I'm just monitoring the Q&A here, and Mike Daly had a comment to the panelists. I think one of the issues with that is that it also makes it difficult for startups to actually catch up. If you have established companies that are out there and you're trying to come out, if you need longer term data, it becomes difficult because you can never quite meet it. So it might be interesting to think about what metrics there would have to be to show it sooner that, hey, you really are doing something that's differentiated.
Keep in mind,
I should point out too, when I was talking about the long term, it was more of when CMS tries to say, okay, we're going to have a value-based agreement, and you're just looking at outcomes after 3 months. So I'm not suggesting, and I agree with Mike, that you need long-term perspective follow-up. And I think that's an area too where a lot of companies ran into problems still periodically where they'd agree with a pivotal trial with FDA, and we're going to do 200 patients with an 18-month follow-up, come back, hit your primary and secondary endpoints. And then the reviewer says, well, I'd feel better if it was, 24 months, another 50. Statistically makes no difference, but they're just asking for, and we're kind of seeing that CYA kind of risk aversion creep back, it was evident 15 years ago. And again, we're starting to see threads of that again, and hope that isn't a trend that continues. Yeah,
at the FDA, there's this thing that they call the least burdensome flag. Jeff likes to talk about this idea that if you feel the FDA is asking for something that's like an academic thing, that they're asking for something that's more therapy for the reviewer than is actually going to make the get you through your product review, then you can say this does not seem least burdensome. And there's a lot of sensitivity at FDA, like this is the policy at the FDA, this is the guidance. So if you feel like you're not getting that, then you should have very low threshold to say, no, this is not least burdensome.
Doug, I welcome the opportunity sometime in the near future to speak with you about the definition of least burdensome.
I would love to talk about it. And at some point, I'd love to find out, I heard this thing on NPR about about barnacle glue. Is that the same thing that you were talking about?
There are a couple different companies that I'm aware of that have researched barnacle glue, muscle glue, mollusk glue, all kinds of different things. It's been around a long time.
Interesting. Okay.
If I could jump in here real quick, I'm looking at some of the questions. We have a few that are very specific, and maybe I'll tee this up to you, Marie, first, and Doug, you may have a comment on this. We had a question about regulatory strategy and whether it makes sense comparing a de novo pathway versus a 510K? Is there an advantage in protecting IP or some other strategic reason to do one versus the other?
Really good question. In my opinion, a big advantage of choosing to do a de novo is you get a new product code. And that may be of some help in your reimbursement discussions. Mark, you may know more about this kind of reimbursement consideration than I do, but I believe that if you differentiated yourself a little bit from a predicate device, in other words, gotten a new product code for a similar technology, it may pave the way to getting some different reimbursement determinations.
Yeah, I do think, again, the de novo new pro code, and also just the, usually there, and it's incorrect because we know that 10 to 15% of 510Ks require clinical data, but there is the optics there. And I think, unfortunately, by some antagonists of the industry who dragged 510K through the mud 10, 15 years ago, and private payers kind of still hang their hat on it. So I would agree that from a reimbursement standpoint, and also, from a regulatory standpoint, you kind of drive the train when it comes to special controls. So, there are, an efficient de novo has benefits. You just want to make sure you're not, it's an efficient de novo. And I think clarity with the FDA is helpful early on in those discussions as well.
Yeah, that's a good point, because we've been finding that de novos can take, the review process can be at least a year. And that needs to be factored in. My friend,
and I will just put a plug in here, Doug. Maybe there have been many more de novos, and the reg does ask for the special controls to be published after 30 days. And there are quite a few that were 6 months and more. And obviously the ability for others to leverage those de novos as predicates is really impeded when those special controls aren't published. So I know there's a lot of capacity issues, but I think that's important to have the real value of the de novo may be realized by the entire industry.
Yeah, and I just saw there's the whole Cardiac Insight and the other passive cardiac monitoring companies where they went through the de novo pathway, had a great device, and then the reimbursement came in a fraction of what made sense from them. It just drove them out of business. A whole class of products. So in that case, the de novo really didn't help them that much, which gets back to this lack of transparency in the decision-making process about reimbursement, because it's hugely disadvantageous to us on an international competitive situation that we can have billions of dollars being poured into these businesses and then have a willy-nilly decision made by a payer who just says that no, it's something you don't have a business,
Or they'll cover it, and then they'll set the reimbursement so low that you can't, that you're losing money.
You can't have an industry where you do that. It's just like saying we don't want to have that industry in this country. We'll send it to China.
Okay, I'm being sensitive of time here. It looks like we're a couple of minutes away from going to the network session. So I apologize that we didn't get to all the questions, but hopefully everyone will join us in the Remo room immediately.
Dave, you got a couple more minutes if we got a couple other questions.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. There was one other specific question, and I think Marie, I'll tee this one up to you as well. There's a company that had wanted to go with the 510K pathway, but now finds themselves going down the Office of Combination Products, and they're just looking for advice. Is there a way to shift that, or are they stuck?
Oh my gosh. There is unlikely to be a way to shift that in my experience.
Okay.
That's can people see Mike Daly's comment?
Yeah.
Full disclosure, Mike Daly is an old friend and a client. Yes, Mike, run. No, that can be a complicated issue, and it's not one that we have found to be quick or easy. I'm sorry to report.
Okay. And maybe just to close things out here, this is for all the panelists, just wondering if you have any parting words of advice for startups who are going through, most of us are focused on our products. And like I said before, thinking about reimbursement and those things come later on. What advice do you have for companies as we're going through the process? How do we get started? And what are important things that we should keep in mind? Maybe I'll throw it to you, Marie. You can start, and then we'll.
Yeah, at the very, very beginning, I want to reiterate what I said in my presentation. Very early on, don't twist yourself into a pretzel by making your technology and your hopes for your business fit a certain regulatory pathway. Go with your passion, go with what you know, go with developing your technology into something that's really going to help patients and the people that take care of them. And once you know the direction you're going in, once you've got your technology finalized into a product, then that's a good time to start finalizing regulatory strategy.
Okay, perfect. And Mark, how about you? And I do have one question that just popped up here real quick. And I believe you had mentioned the MSIP program when you were speaking before. We have just one question about commenting on whether or not that will come to fruition.
I think the MSIP rule that was finalized in January and has been delayed to December 15th. That rule, as it's structured, I don't think will come to fruition. I think a variation of it will. Again, they laid out some operational issues. You know, the rule that was finalized, it didn't require a company to collect data. I think that's a reasonable request. If you're getting this coverage, you should collect data. It allowed the company to basically approach CMS immediately and get coverage. I think you probably need to have a more notice with CMS. So I think, again, there are ways in which, maybe people have raised concerns that, coming to the market with an FDA without any Medicare patients in your clinical trial would be. So again, I think there are some reasonable enhancements or polishing up that can move forward. And our hope is, I think we'll see another notice of proposed rulemaking, I suspect, this summer. So ultimately, I think there's a recognition, and it's a bipartisan issue as demonstrated by the reintroduction of the MSIP bill today up on Capitol Hill, that narrowing that gap between regulatory and reimbursement is important. And the final thing that CMS has noted, and we've noted, but we don't want let perfect be the enemy of the good, MSIP addresses coverage, but it still doesn't address coding and payment. And so those are things that we're going to continue to work forward and collectively, so you have kind of a holistic solution here by the time we get this implemented.
We also have to figure out some way of provisioning CMS with the personnel they need to actually do MSIP, because right now they just have nowhere near enough people to do what they need to do.
Doug, how about any final thoughts for our startup companies as they start navigating the regulatory process?
Yeah, it's funny that there's I've made most of my money on companies that straddle two disciplines where people talk very different languages. And at the FDA, it's interesting. All these things that I'm talking about, whether it's I would say, do all your homework really early on. Talk to patients. Right. Maybe fund an econometric study about risk-reward trade-offs. Talk to everybody you can talk to, all the professional societies. Make sure you're talking to your leadership, not only the existing leadership, but the incoming leadership, so you kind of know where they are, and make sure you're just talking to everybody. In the business world, we call this marketing, and in the regulatory world, we just call this evidence generation. And to the extent that you can do that early on, remember, regulatory risk is just one of the risks that you face as a startup entrepreneur. You have personnel risks, regulatory risk, you have all kinds of other risks. And when you go to an investor, they evaluate the totality of that risk. And so the extent that you can get that done early when your burn rate is really low and that you've made those relationships and been talking to those people, that's the biggest thing you can do to make your path all the way to commercialization much easier, and do it early on. Because honestly, it's a great decision. If you decide early on, this is just too much, I love this idea, but there's just too much risk involved and I can't finance it. That's a much better decision to come to early than the very painful decision later, which I have done myself. And it's life-alteringly, painful snail sliding down the sharp edge of a razor blade. You're much better off figuring that up front.
I agree fully. Thanks for that. So Dean, I think I'll turn it back over to you.
David, thank you so much. And many thanks to Doug, Mark, and Marie for all your comments. Just your insightful presentations, and then this dialogue has been tremendous. I want to shout out to MDMA in particular, also a membership organization. We've got a lot of MedTech entrepreneurs on here. If you're not a member, please look up Mark and think very seriously about joining him. As I said, he's headed over to the Capitol here in a moment's notice to advocate on behalf of the industry, and does so for many small and mid-sized companies in addition to larger ones. Doug, it's been fantastic to hear what you're doing within the FDA, and Marie, your many years of experience in helping to support companies as well.
Hey, Dean, can I just make up two shout outs? I'd love to shout out to Mark for his 20 years of spectacular work he's done at MDMA and helping companies, and his relationships on the Hill are just profoundly important. And then secondly, I want to make a shout out to my colleagues at the FDA, just fantastic people. I don't think people understand how hard these people work and how dedicated they are. They had many opportunities to go do things where they could have made a lot more money, had a lot more, I guess, like I said, a lot of opportunities. And Jeff Shuren, my boss, is a true visionary, and I thank him. I've gotten much more out of the FDA than they've ever gotten out of me.
Well, with that, let me ask all of our attendees to take a look in your chat window right now. You'll see a link to head on over to the Remo room. Again, invite our speakers, our panelists, as well as attendees to head over there and have some informal around the table conversations. So please join us there. And as you're opening that up and linking, let me also just finally thank our sponsors, Baker Tilly, Drexel University, Duane Morris, EisnerAmper, and Fox Rothschild for their continued support of the MedTech series and MedTech sector, and certainly PACT. We are humble in our support of this organization and all those MedTech companies that are just doing amazing work to improve patient care and outcomes. So we're grateful for all that you are doing, again, all you MedTech entrepreneurs that are on the channel here this morning. So with that, let me send you over to the Remo room and look forward to seeing everyone again in the near future. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks, Dean. Thanks, Doug. Murray.
Bye, everyone.
David.
Yeah.